Welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio, exploring the frontiers of spirituality, consciousness, the esoteric, and humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth. I'm your host, Nick Mather, and in this episode I'm joined by Shirley Blancke, author of The Way of Abundance and Joy, the Shamanic Teachings of Don Alberto Taxo. Among other topics, Shirley discusses the Andean prophecy of the eagle and the condor, Don Alberto's teachings on awareness, gratitude, and interconnection, and muses on the intersection of Christianity and shamanism. Also, please be sure to subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you watch on YouTube, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support is truly appreciated. Shirley Blancke is an archaeologist and anthropologist with an undergraduate degree from Cambridge University and a doctorate from Boston University. As a scientific assistant at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, she created exhibits for the Hall of Man in Africa. As an honorary curator at the Concord Museum in Concord, Massachusetts, she has identified and cataloged more than 30,000 Native American artifacts and created new exhibits to showcase the Native American history of the area. Shirley has worked with Native Americans in Massachusetts, learned traditional sacred dance from a Hawaiian kahuna, and hosted ceremonies for an Oglala Lakota medicine man. She studied shamanic traditions with Hank Wesselman for 10 years and has worked with Ecuadorian Yachak Don Alberto Taxo for 7 years. She is author of The Way of Abundance and Joy, the Shamanic Teachings of Don Alberto Taxo. Shirley, welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, well, I'm very excited about speaking with you today and looking forward to this. I also wanted to congratulate you on your book, The Way of Abundance and Joy. It was a wonderful introduction, I think, to the teachings of Don Alberto. And that's my first question for you is, who is Don Alberto? And in conjunction with that, how did you come to know him?
Oh, well, that's a big question. He's, I should say, perhaps start out right away. And I'm not sure if you know this, but he did pass away from COVID at the beginning of February, just before my book came out.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes, but anyway, in a way that this is produced some very interesting things that have been happening. However, he was a very revered shaman and spiritual leader. And as many indigenous leaders are, he had his finger in many different pies, including politics. So one of the things I hope comes across in the book is, well, what some of those different pies were, or what he was doing. So how I connected with him, I mean, this is really not anything that I did. A friend said to me, well, there's this indigenous medicine man who's going to be giving a talk just 15 minutes away from your home, and would you be interested in going? So I said, well, yes, I think I would be. I haven't heard anybody like that speak in a long time. So it turned out it was a very hot June evening. I almost didn't go. But I finally got myself out of the house, and on my way there, I found myself feeling very excited and very nervous. And I thought, this is very odd. Why would I be feeling this way? You know, I don't know anything about this man, no connection with him. So anyway, I got there, and it turned out he was giving a basic lesson in shamanic journeying. I don't know if your listeners know what that is, if I should say just a little bit about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. All right. Well, it's a method, usually through drumming and singing, of changing one's brainwaves so that one can access the part of one's brain that has creative information, dreams, intuitions, this kind of thing, in order to get that kind of information in a waking state rather than a sleeping state. So there was an intermission halfway through this, and I looked at some of the literature he had set out, and I saw he was a shaman of the elements, earth, air, fire, and water. And at that, I thought, oh, I think I better tell him that the dance group that I'm in, that's something else, by the way, I was in a sacred dance group, that we have just, no, we're about to do a ceremony at the Old North Bridge in Concord in honor of water for the Global Water Initiative Against Pollution. So at the end of the class, I got hold of the interpreter to tell him this. He didn't speak English at that time. I didn't speak Spanish. And he was standing, I would say, about 15 feet away from me and facing a different direction. So she told him the story, what I was doing with the dance. And he spun round, and it was the most extraordinary thing. I mean, it was like a laser of light coming out of his eyes that curled through the air as it came towards me, came right into my eyes and dazzled me. And I thought, what on earth is that? But right at that moment, the interpreter, who I'm sure didn't see it, asked me a question, and I didn't have a chance to try and pursue it at that moment. So, however, my interest was really hooked. I thought I've got to try and find out what this is all about. So the lady who was his hostess for that evening wanted to go to Ecuador to try and get more healing from him because she'd had damage from a fall. And she asked me if I'd like to go with her. So I said, yes, I would. And we weren't going to go till the next year. So I had a number of months in which to relearn Spanish. I mean, I'd learned it some in high school, but that didn't get me very far. And I wanted to be able to hold at least a basic conversation. So by the time we went, I was able to do that. So eventually, I found myself alone with him on that trip with her. And so I had a chance to ask him. I said, what was that light that came out of your eyes when we first met? And so he sort of shuffled his feet on the ground, and he looked like maybe he wasn't sure if I could handle what he was going to say. And then he said, well, it was a signal. So I said, what kind of a signal? So he said, well, we knew each other in previous lives. And I took an actual step backwards at that point, because I don't come from a background that, understands or knows anything about previous lives. So then when I pulled myself together a little bit, I said, well, what were we doing? And he said, well, we were healers in an indigenous environment in Colombia. But then he cut me off. And he said, however, what's important is the present and not the past. Right? So I didn't learn any more from him about what all that was about. I think I've learned a bit since. I've got a message since he passed that at least I've been rereading Michael Newton's, the hypnotherapist's books on life between lives. And he talks about souls being able to focus energy in a laser-like beam, although usually it's not used in this dimension, but it seems to have been used that way in this case. So anyway, I've been learning some very interesting things from that book. I read them many years ago before I met him, and I thought it was intriguing, but I didn't relate to what he was saying. It wasn't my experience. And now I'm rereading it, and there are things that are jumping out at me all the time. So it's really quite fascinating.
Yeah, very interesting. And it's interesting that you're rereading these books, because the Shamanic Journey itself has something to do with consciousness and an altered state or a non-ordinary state of consciousness. And from what you're saying, it seems like we can still contact maybe people after they've passed through these non-ordinary states of consciousness. Is that what you're saying in terms of Don Alberto?
I would say so. Yes, I feel like, well, I got an urge to read this book, after he had passed. And then all of this information in it started to hit me. So it seemed to me that was a leading of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose you couldn't believe that or not as you like, but it's been very meaningful to me, what I've been learning since. And it makes sense.
Yeah.
To me.
Do you think that Don Alberto led you to that, or?
I would think so, but one can view it that way or not, I suppose. But
okay, all right. So Don Alberto, he invited you to write this book for him. Is that correct?
Right. Yes.
Well, do you have an idea of why he wanted you to do this?
Well, it had to do with the dream. So I don't know if you want me to describe what that dream was.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm not somebody, again, who pays a whole lot of attention to dreams. It seems to me my dreams are usually about anxiety. But this one was very different. I had gone to the eastern coast of Mexico, what's called the Mayan Riviera, with my family. And it was after a long New England winter. And it was lovely to be in that warm climate and the warm ocean. I love to swim. And so I was very relaxed. I think this is one of the keys to this. And so really just to be close to the time when I would have woken up anyway, I got this very vivid dream where I was standing in the opening of a cave, looking out onto a sunlit landscape. And in the distance, I saw rising above the horizon a bird shape. And as it came towards me, it got bigger and bigger until its wings were completely shutting out the light in the whole sky. And I saw it was an eagle. And it kept on coming to me and then landed just in front of me. And at that point, I saw that it had the face of a Native American lady that I knew. And then at that moment, there was a ballpoint pen that sprouted little wings, and it was fluttering backwards and forwards between us like this. And so the eagle laughed, and she said, "Oh, yeah, now we know why you write so well. You have a magic pen." Well, I thought this was a joke, I mean, but I did recognize that it was a pen that I thought was mine. I mean, it had a pale blue color and a black design. I didn't take in what the design was. Then I woke up. And when I woke, I realized that I had that pen with me and that it was one that had been sent to me in the mail a few days before. And I didn't remember where from. It was one of these things that were promotions of some kind. And I just stuck it in my bag, and there it was. So I looked at it, and the design, the black design on the pale blue background, was of different sizes of feathers. And at that moment, the word pluma came in my head, which is the Spanish for both pen and feather. So that to me was a clue that maybe I should tell this dream to Don Alberto. I had known him about 2 years at that point. And when I did, he said, "Well, I hope you'll write a book for me." Right. And so the actual construction of the book is quite complex because he asked me to translate a book which was published in Spanish by an Ecuadorian anthropologist, and she had taken a number of interviews with him, but he also wanted me to write about my own experience with him. So when I looked at the book, I read the book, and I liked the interviews, but she had set them in an anthropological context. It was somewhat academic. And I felt that they could reach many more people if they were told as a story and handled differently. So he said, okay. And then I said, but also I've only known you for 2 years. You've had students here in North America who've studied with you for many years. How about asking some of them to say how you might have affected their lives? And he thought that was a good idea. Gave me a list of people and their emails, so that made it easy for me to contact people. So the book is actually in 3 parts. The first part is about his early life, and there's some great stories in that come out of the interviews. The second part is his teachings, and there's also a bit there where I have tried to set his teachings in a wider Andean philosophical context. And then the last part is the reflection of students and some associates, so one of whom is John Perkins, who's the author of New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and it's Akbiri, who's written a number of books on shamanism. So that's how it came about.
Okay. Yeah, I was very surprised when I got to the section, the interview with John Perkins, because I knew him from, Confessions of an Economic Hitman,
Yeah.
but I had no idea about this other aspect of his experience in life.
Yes. Well, it was very, very important, and he's written some books on shamanism too. And he was somebody who feels that his life was saved by the shamans actually in the Amazonian part of Ecuador, I think it was. So that changed. That was what changed his whole mindset about what he was doing as an economic high flyer for the government, basically.
Quite fascinating. One of the major themes, I think, or key ideas that weaves throughout the book is this prophecy of the condor and the eagle.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could maybe speak to that a little bit, because I think that'll give us a lot of context for the entire conversation that we'll be having.
Okay. Well, yes. I mean, this is an Andean prophecy, and people may well have heard about it before. There have been mainly Peruvian shamans coming here teaching about this probably for 20 years, as Don Alberto also has been doing. But he devoted his whole life to this prophecy. And there are different ways you can understand it, but the main one is that the eagle is North America, in which, by the way, they include Central America, and that the North Americans are mainly oriented towards logic, or at least that's the primary orientation. And then there's the South America, who's the Condor, and they're oriented more towards awareness and feeling and perception. And so the prophecy is that these two will fly together in the same sky, and in doing that, they will produce a civilization of the kind that's never been produced before. And the time for doing that is now. Right. So that, and it started, I guess at the end of the 1990s, that was when the decision was made by the South American Shamans Council that they should take this message north to us. So that's what they've been doing for 20 years. And so he's, been teaching, but not on a big scale, I would say. And I think perhaps part of that, I mean, many of these people who speak good English have been on the internet, on the the sites that have courses in shamanic knowledge from the Andes, but he didn't speak English, and so that limited that aspect of it. But he's been teaching small numbers of people for many years, and I think he really was very anxious for this book to come out in English, to reach a wider audience. And one person who interviewed me made the comment, well, maybe his dying now has to do with the fact that his work is essentially done, that hopefully the book will spread and that people will learn about it.
Yeah. And, I want to address that, but the thing that immediately also comes to mind is this idea of, what he had said to you when you first met was that you had shared previous lives together. And one of the things I wonder is if he is going to, and in that previous life, he said you were both healers, and then he was a healer in this life. And I was wondering if he's going to come back again, because it seems to me that this message is something that especially the Northern Eagle is going to need to hear over and over and over.
Over again, yes.
Yeah.
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 Well, I don't know. I mean, he said to me that, his whole belief system, and this is something which also Michael Newton is talking about, it's a reincarnational system. And but he was saying to me he was hoping that he didn't have to come back again. Then somebody else heard very recently that he was not going to come back again. I don't know if it's for him to make that decision, but anyway, so who knows at this point.
Yeah. Well, I found that the message was so relevant, and I think it's important. And I know that other teachers from South America, other shamans, have been saying similar things. And I just wanted to give a little bit of current context for this. We're recording this on March 21st, the day after the spring equinox, 2022. And right now, the war in Ukraine is capturing all the headlines. Yet it was reported last week that the Antarctica was 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 40 degrees Celsius. And the Arctic was more than 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 degrees Celsius, warmer than normal. And the environmental journalist and author George Monbiot tweeted over the weekend that, and this is a quote, "The war we have waged against the natural world has, in climatic terms, just gone nuclear."
Yeah.
And it seems to me that this message of Don Alberto is so important right now. Because I see his teachings as being inherently ecological.
Yeah.
One that he taught that everything is interconnected.
Sorry, everything is what? Sorry?
Interconnected.
Interconnected, yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I mean, to me, the important aspect of his teachings is how, in a way, how easy it is. It's almost so easy that you might think there's nothing to it. But the important thing is to keep doing it. And if you keep doing it, it actually changes your whole mindset, which is what I found. I might say what he did with my friend and I, this is after what I was talking about with him saying about the previous lives. He took us on what he described as a pilgrimage. So he was driving us through the countryside. He started out before we left with a fire outside and offering prayers to the four directions, and to Mother Earth. This was in Quechua, his native language. At the time, I didn't understand what he was saying, but that was what it would be about. I blew a conch shell in the four directions. And then we started out. And he said to us, well, you need to understand this is a sacred journey. So driving along, he would do things like there was a little shower. He would open the car window, stick his hand out to feel the rain. And I'm sure he was giving thanks, although at that moment he wasn't saying it out loud. Or he would sometimes stop the side of the road. He would take a leaf and let us smell it. There are some lovely lemon plants there. We could look at a flower. And so the important thing he was saying is to be aware of what's around you in nature. And if you're attracted to something like a flower, to really appreciate it, if it has a scent, take in the scent, and to give thanks for it. And so if you do this on kind of a regular basis, it really does, I found it kind of lightens your mood, right? Mm. And I think I noticed this particularly because I grew up in England. And as a child, I was on my grandparents' farm and I'd roam through the fields and the woods and I'd pick wildflowers and I'd look at the hunter's moon at night or out of my bedroom window. Anyway, I felt very connected to the environment. And then I came here to the US, as a young adult, and suddenly I didn't know anything that was around me, what any plants or the trees or anything were. And I tried to get around that by learning their names in books. And I found that didn't work. I mean, I just felt alienated from it. Mm-hmm. And I always say that after a bit, I kind of pushed it in the background. But with Don Alberto's teachings now, what I find is that while I may not know what the things are, I feel connected to them. It's made me feel able to be connected to this environment that I'm in. So I think that's important, perhaps, for a lot of people. And he also has suggestions of how to do it if you live in a city, too. Mm. So, there's a lot of good, simple, basic advice in this book. And I think what I like about his approach is the fact that he didn't wear fancy clothes. He didn't have fancy hats. He did, yes, use a drum and a rattle. And I feel very honored he gave me his rattle at one point. But otherwise, he looked like a modern guy. And right. One thing actually I just learned about him, which is there are different versions of this in the book. I mean, when he was a young man, he was wearing long hair, which I think was in part because a Colombian mentor that he had considered hair to be sacred. But I think this is a Native American view anyway. And then one time when he was in California, and I've just heard this from the lady who was with him at the time, he took a knife and cut it off. And he offered it into the fire as a burnt offering for humanity in a ceremony that she was giving at that time. And after that, he had always had a shaved head, and I only ever saw him with a shaved head. So, I just I'm thinking about the fact that he made this sacrifice of something that was really important to him on behalf of other people at that time.
Yeah, I really appreciated this aspect of his. I think that the way you put it in the book, and this is a quote of his, the path I teach is to be awake all the time, at every moment of our lives, to have open awareness of every moment of our walk. Yeah. And this was very reminiscent to me of some of the teachings of Buddhism. You made a point in the book to clarify that when he talks about this path of feeling, that it's not emotions. That's how we often think of feeling, but actual kind of sensation.
Yes, the thing is that there's one word in Spanish is a sentir, but in English it can be either feeling or sensation. So you have to kind of think carefully
Okay.
which one you're going to use there.
Okay. Yeah, but it reminded me of the Buddhist idea of mindfulness, which I think in a Western context, we often associate just with what's going on in between our ears.
Yes.
But really, it's this idea of being aware of the present moment and
Yeah.
all the sensations and feelings, both, that's going
Right.
through us at all times.
Yes, and one might feel a bit overwhelmed at the idea, well, one's supposed to do this all the time.
Yeah.
But he was, very somebody who just really eased anxiety all the time. He would say, if you forget, don't beat up on yourself. Don't worry about it. Just when you remember, do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's like any other practice. If you keep doing it when you remember, then you get so you remember a bit more
Mm.
to do it, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it comes to mean more to you the more you do it, in fact.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's something else I really appreciated, was that there seemed to be a sort of spontaneity
Oh
to
yeah.
spirituality for him.
Oh yes. Yeah, that's what I really enjoyed. And I mean, I've said in the book that I enjoy. Well, I joined the Episcopal Church in middle age, really, because I felt a need for some kind of spiritual outlet. I wasn't brought up with any religion, and so I like the liberal aspect of that Christianity, but I also have a hard time with the liturgical side of it, which I can't do it on a weekly basis because I like um, like you say, the spontaneity, the spontaneous approach so much better. So, but I want to hang in with the people who were there, and so I try to kind of balance the two.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to
yeah.
ask you about that because I found it very interesting, because it was towards the end of the book where you discuss being a member of the Episcopal Church, but yet you also have this interest and practice in the shamanic. And I was curious how you kind of combine or reconcile the two.
Well, I think I've always probably been a seeker throughout my life, and well, I should say that I suppose I got some introduction to Anglicanism as a child because my grandfather was organist at the local Church of England church. So I grew up with the music. But my family not being religious, my grandfather, in fact, didn't belong to the Anglican Church. So I wasn't brought up with any of the theology, any of that. It was just the music. So that was the really what drew me to the Episcopal Church originally. Um, and there's a lot of the theology that I don't really hang in with. I mean, I like the creation theology aspect that Matthew Fox has developed. And so when I discovered that, I thought, aha, well, this makes it possible for me to hang in here. And also it fits with the shamanic aspect, which I had learned about when I was in college originally and got interested in it that way.
Yeah, I had the great opportunity to take a course with Matthew Fox,
Oh
on
yeah, yes,
my yeah,
right.
Meister Eckhart. And
Yeah,
I recently reached out to him, or at least his publicist, to see if I could get him on the podcast as well, because I would love to speak to him about that, his creation spirituality. Um,
right. Well, yeah, I had the opportunity once to tell him a little bit about Don Alberto, and I keep thinking I should get in touch with the
yeah,
publicist too and say, would you like to read this book?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
because I think he would be interested in it. But I haven't got that far yet.
Yeah. I think he would appreciate it very much.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I hope you don't feel that this is unfair, but it's in the context of kind of balancing the Christian, Episcopalian, and the shamanic. Do you think Jesus was a kind of shaman?
Yes, I do. And I might not say that out loud to too many people around the house. Although I think they're very open-minded, they would understand that. But certainly, Don Alberto, his view was that Jesus was a very powerful shaman. And from knowing, having been around Don Alberto as much as I have, I do feel that he's kind of a model, probably, for what the way Jesus would have been in his own time. And also, actually, the whole orientation of Andean healing strikes me as being similar to what Jesus was doing. Jesus never did the same kind of healing twice, but sometimes he used techniques that are actually very similar to what's used in Ecuador now. But it depended on intuition. He decided what the person needed in the moment and did that. And so my feeling is that we could probably understand a whole lot more about who Jesus was during his life if we knew more about indigenous practices such as those that are conducted in Ecuador now. And in fact, on Thursday this week, my church is having a healing service, and I've been asked to give reflections in it. And so I'm going to talk about this. In fact, this is what I'm going to say.
Oh.
So, yeah, we'll see. I think people will accept it all right. I think they're open enough at this point that they will.
Yeah. Well, I've often thought that there was a shamanic aspect to Jesus simply based on the fact that one of his primary roles, if not the primary role, was as a healer. And that
Was what?
as a healer,
Oh,
that he
see,
was healing people. And I think that that's one of the primary functions, if not also the primary function of a shaman, is healing.
yes, it is. It is, right. And I would say that there's something else I learned from my experience in Ecuador. I had an experience that turned out to be a visionary experience. I don't know if you want me to describe that, but it had the effect, it made me realize that, um, if you don't make a mental distinction between um, kind of the dream world, visionary experience, and ordinary everyday life, you can, in fact, sometimes not tell the difference between them, which was something that I had never thought was possible before. Because when I was doing a shamanic journey, I always knew which reality I was in, whether I was in the dream world or not. But in fact, with this experience in Ecuador, I was in the dream world and thought it was part of everyday life. So that tells me that some of these stories you run into in the Gospels were in fact visionary experiences. And the people who wrote the Gospels didn't make a distinction between them. And so that creates a problem perhaps for people now because they don't quite know what was going on then.
Right.
So what happened with this experience was that Don Alberto took my friend and me, also his partner and their young son, and we went to a sacred lake. And there was a promontory, a man-made promontory that had been built out into the lake, and it was grassy, and it had a bank in it. And he and his family, they stopped one side of the bank and had a picnic, and they told my friend and me, I think he probably gave us some bread crusts or something to go around the other side and make an offering to the lake, right? So when we got around the other side of the bank, we sort of parted company, we went in different directions. And I stood there and I thought, what am I supposed to be doing here, praying to a lake, or what do I think I'm doing? You know, am I supposed to be Christian? And then I thought, well, I don't need to have all of these scruples. Really, I can just say thank you for being here at this time, which is what I did. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw Don Alberto at the edge of the water, and he had a condor feather, dipped it in the water, and flicked it in my direction, and it hit me full in the chest, so that I stepped backwards. And then he dipped it in the water again, flicked it again, it hit me full in the face. I really felt it, right? And I thought, this is odd. You know, it seems like this is some kind of an initiation, but he didn't say anything to me about this. So then that was the middle of the day. There wasn't anything special about it. It was sort of a gray day. And the rest of the time was quite busy. We went sightseeing, we looked at things on stalls. And it wasn't until I got into bed at night that I had time to think about it. And when I thought about it, it suddenly hit me. I didn't get wet. You know, my shirt wasn't wet. My face wasn't wet. I didn't have to dry off. And I thought it must have been a visionary experience. And it shook me up because, as I said, you know, previously I had always known what the difference was. So the next day, you know, I asked him about it. And first thing I said was, were you really there? He said, no, I wasn't there. And then he got quite excited and his eyes flashed and so on. And he said, that was the power of water. That was a real gift for you. It's something you can use in healing. Mm. So to me, you know, this is sort of at the bottom of the kind of experience that one reads about in the Gospels that people now don't understand at all. So it's really given me a different perspective on the whole thing.
Yeah. Do you think that this kind of conversation or reciprocity between Christianity and shamanism, would you consider that part of this eagle and condor prophecy?
That's an interesting question. I don't really have never thought about it that way, but I think probably it is. I mean, in a way, I think, well, what I feel is that Christianity needs to open up its mindset. I think we're stuck with, you know, 5th century theology. And we need to be more open to what's going on in the modern world. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if people can be open to the shamanic approach, I think that's a good thing. And I believe the younger people probably can be. Mm-hmm. But I think this sort of hidebound theological view is why so many people are walking away. Right. From Christianity at the present time. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I don't know about Buddhism. He never studied Buddhism. I asked him, and but I think his approach, as you said, probably, you know, has some similarities, at least with some aspects of Buddhism.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminded me in terms of Buddhism, the Zen tradition. I know that there's this aspect of, you know, the awareness is being aware of all the sensation and all the feelings. When I teach this in class, I often give the example of washing dishes, because I don't like washing dishes, but, you know, it's like, you know, don't stand there and think constantly about how much I hate washing dishes, but rather to be in that present moment and to feel the water and to feel the soap and the weight of the dishes and to be totally immersed in the experience.
Yeah.
And that's what being present and being awake really is. And that's why I was making a comparison, because it seemed like Don Alberto was saying something very similar.
Yes, and of course, what you're using that story makes me think of Brother Lawrence. I mean, this was, I'm sure, what he was doing. He was doing cooking all the time, and everybody thought he was a saint. You know, he wasn't doing anything really except cooking. But yes, and then something else that Don Alberto would say was, well, it's easy to give thanks for things you really enjoy, but it's also important to give thanks for things you don't enjoy. And you can say, well, you know, I don't understand this. I don't know why I have to go through this, but I will trust that it's to teach me something. And I was interested the other day because a friend of mine, you know, who had heard this from me said, oh, you know, I've always been bothered by the big trucks driving down the hill outside my house because they put on their brakes and they make this terrible noise. And then she said, the other day I was thinking about what Don Alberto had said when one of these trucks did this. And so she said, I actually looked at the truck and I saw it was a food truck. And she said, it changed my whole view because we have, you know, a grocery store on the other side of the road. And I thought, well, here, you know, we have this easy access to food. And whereas there are a lot of people in the world, including now in Ukraine, who are having difficulty eating. So she said, you know, that just changed my mindset right away, right there about it.
Right.
So I thought that was a good example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an excellent example, actually. And I wanted to ask you about this because gratitude, or the expression of gratitude, seems to be one of the core aspects of his teachings. And, you know, that's also a message that runs throughout the book. And I think you've addressed this, but I thought I would ask just more directly, you know, why is gratitude important?
Well, I don't know if I have the ultimate answer to that. I mean, it's important in Christianity too, at least in some
Yeah.
aspects of it. Um, but I think because it, all right. I think whether you believe in a transcendent being or not, if you do, maybe you can feel that you're expressing something to that being for a gift. And even if you don't, well, you can also, it is also a gift of some kind, and um, it can actually raise the way that you feel. You know, if you're in a depressive mood, it can make you feel better if you say thank you for what's around you. So I think whether one is religious or not, that it can be an important practice
Mm.
to do that.
Yeah,
It
it seems
changes your relationship to what's around you.
yeah, it seems like it's a an approach of embrace rather than kind of rejecting the negative.
Rejecting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes. Yeah. I actually, another interviewer said to me what he got out of the book was the development in Don Alberto's mindset himself, where as a young man, he was sort of fighting against, and by the end, he was fighting with.
mm,
And, you know, I thought that was a good comment. I mean, because originally, well, all right, I've said in the book how his father was killed in front of him when he was a young man of 19 and deliberately run down. So he had a sour view of, you know, the dominant culture there. And he said, I had been thinking about to myself, well, why don't my people There are more of us than there are of them. Why don't we just get rid of them?
Mm.
Why don't my people do something? Why don't the elders do something about it? And then over time, he learned that his culture was one of peaceability, and their understanding that the reason they've survived for really 500 years of domination is because they didn't fight back. So they've had to put up with a lot, but they're still there, and they still hold on to their ancient beliefs in many ways. So, he came to an understanding that his ancestral teachings had importance, and had importance beyond just their own culture. Yeah. But his father and his grandfather were also Yachaks, that is, they were medicine people, and they also were devoted to the eagle and condor dream, and they brought him up with that. And I think his father definitely foresaw that he was going to have to, Don Alberto was going to have to engage with the Western world. And so he saw that he was educated in different Western mindsets in order to do that.
Yeah. And along those lines as well, in the 1990s, Don Alberto was a leader in a uprising of indigenous people in Ecuador. And I was wondering if you might be able to speak a little bit in regards to his political activities.
Well, at that time, yes. I mean, the indigenous in Ecuador were really looking to be given a voice in government. And there wasn't just one uprising then, there were several. And it was successful in the end. I mean, for a while he was a hunted man, and has a story about hiding in a sagebrush and the soldiers never finding him. He somehow was invisible. But eventually, yes, they were taken much more seriously, began to have political voice, and also they got written into the constitution that the nature was important and that it needed to be protected. Since then, there's been some backsliding, partly, with multinational companies exploiting the oil in the and the Amazon and so on. But but more countries now do have that in their constitution. We're not one of them, but anyway, people are taking nature more seriously in general. I just hope we're not too late. Was all.
Yes, I hope so too. And one of the questions, I usually save this for the end, but it seems like the appropriate time to ask in regards to the teachings of Don Alberto and nature. And I think maybe I'll ask this in two aspects. And one, I don't know if you can answer, but in regards to the environment right now and the environmental concerns, do you think that Don Alberto was hopeful for the future? And then I want to know if you're hopeful.
Okay. Yes. Well, interestingly, his last recorded speech, as far as I know, was given in May 2020 in response to the pandemic. And he and several other Yashaks were invited to give their response to this. So one of the things that he said was that, there's been a lot of talk about doing something about pollution, or the air and the water, helping the environment, but it's all really been mainly talk. Nobody's done very much. But he said, in my view, Mother Nature is capable of healing herself, that she has the power to do all of that. And, you know, we are part of Mother Nature. We don't control Mother Nature, that she's her own spirit and can handle things, right? Um, so he was, you know, sounding a hopeful note there. So I think I will take a leaf out of his book and say that I hope, you know, that things will manage to turn around. He also, um, before he went into hospital, which was in January, he was giving almost weekly presentations on Zoom that some of us were watching. What he was doing at that time was teaching us to raise our emotional level by thinking about, you know, pleasant experiences we'd had or looking at pictures that appealed to us, so we can raise the emotional level there, and then, you know, try and project love outwards to the world. He said the world needs love projecting out to it. So I think that's an important teaching also. And I do wonder a little bit, after talking to you earlier about sacrificing his hair for humanity. I wonder a little bit, since he died really less than a month before this whole Ukraine business, whether in fact, you know, he sacrificed himself too at that point, because I think, you know, he was at a point with the disease where if he had been willing to be intubated a certain time, maybe he could have pulled through it, but he chose not to do it at that point. So I don't know, but that's just, you know, coming to my head today, in fact.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. It seems like, in terms of the healing that the planet has to undergo, I understand and agree that Mother Nature is going to be perfectly capable of healing herself. Yeah. But that the greater healing has to start with us.
Yes.
And our connection to Mother Nature.
Right. Well, I think so. But I think a lot of people are going in that direction. But as I see it, the problem is the people who are in control of, you know, big business and in politics and so on. They don't seem like they've got the message yet. So I don't know.
Right.
One other aspect of Don Alberto's message that intrigued me was that he says the place that we're in at the moment is what he calls a Pachacuti, which is the world turning over. And this is not the first time that it's happened, but this is the world turning over from 500 years of, at least for them, for domination, where there's been domination by a sort of an aggressive male orientation. That now what we're entering is the rise of female spirit, not only in the female but in the male, which can lead to an era of peace and understanding and hopefulness. So, you know, that again is a positive message, and obviously we're very much at the beginning of it if it's happening. You know, I like to trust that it is happening. So.
Yes, I hope so as well. I do. And I see signs of it. And I think that there is concern by more people now. But, you know, we have to get towards those at the top somehow, some way.
Yes.
But it's something I think that has to begin at sort of the bottom and rise up.
Yeah. Well, I think so too. I mean, obviously, it's not happening from the top and coming down. So,
yeah. There are profit reasons probably for why that is so.
Yeah. I used to be amused. There was a medicine man I knew here in Massachusetts who was he was involved in politics too, and he had this phrase: "The scum always rises to the top." And I won't explain that anymore. We can take it whatever
Right.
way one wants.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, and I like this idea, and these are ideas that I think are so important, and this is why I found the book so interesting and valuable, is not just, this gratitude and the notion that we are in nature, but there are practical ways that we can attempt to incorporate this in all of our lives. I
Yes.
like that.
Yeah.
um, it was the in along lines with this spontaneous spirituality, these ritual actions.
Yeah.
And the teaching is that that people should create their own rituals out of their heart as they appear in their daily lives. And I was wondering if you might be able to offer an example of what that might look like.
Well, I think anything that you're doing in a way. I mean, you could even be washing the dishes.
Okay.
Um, but an example that his wife is doing at the moment is planting corn.
Hmm.
So if you have a garden, it's planting things that are going to grow. Or one of their forms of doing this was just to make offerings, of whatever you might have. If you have some sage, that's nice, but it doesn't have to be sage. It can be anything. Make an offering in the environment, in a place that attracts you, and again to give thanks. But I think the idea of the ruroi, the ritual, really is to do with action of something that you're actually doing, like planting or something along those lines, to do with your work.
Hmm.
And somebody commented to me that my engaging in interviews to do with this book is a form of ruroi.
Hmm.
So yeah, I
Okay.
think that gives an idea, I hope, anyway.
Yeah, no, it does. And I only have a couple more questions for you, but one is that Don Alberto, you describe him as an elemental shaman, or a
Mhm.
shaman that worked with the
Of
elements,
the elements, yeah.
right? And the four elements I think most people are familiar with, but there's also, you describe a fifth element.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could maybe explain that a little bit more, what this fifth element may be.
Well, I don't know a whole lot about that myself, but my understanding is that it's the four elements all together.
Okay.
It's the unity of the four. And that somehow, that has even more power than they do separately. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
And
but yeah, and I think he used oil as an expression of that. I mean, in the healing, they used plants and spraying water and a candle for the fire, or real fire, and then the oil at the end was the ushai.
mm, okay.
Mm.
And is he worked with all the elements, correct?
Yes, although mainly I think for him the most important one was water.
Okay.
But he seems also to have been a fire. The fire element was part of him. But one of the points he makes, I think, that is also important, that all of these elements are a part of us. I mean, we tend to think of them as being outside us, but we have our bodies are something like 70% water. And then there's the heat inside us, there's the fire. Also, the way that they expressed sexuality was the fire of life. They don't have a word for sex. The wind. So the breath, the breath is very important. So all of these things are aspects of us as well.
Right. And you personally work primarily with water in your healing practice. Is that correct?
No, not really, because no, I've only had a chance to use that kind of technique with a few people, with the Andean technique. I'm actually a member of the hands-on healing group at church. And of course, we haven't been able to do that during the pandemic, but we've had sort of Zoom sessions. So I've not found a way really of including water in that, but I've come to the conclusion that maybe the technique is not so important, that what's important is rather for the people who are engaged in it to trust that what they're doing is effective. And to have, a belief in what is happening. So, whether you're sprayed with water or whether there's laying on of hands or whether you're just hearing prayers through Zoom, I feel like all of that can work, if people believe it can work or trust that it can work.
Right. And you make a distinction in the book, which I think is an important distinction between healing and curing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, well, curing is sort of the physical, where the physical symptoms go away and you're completely whole on a physical level, but you can be healed in the mind and spirit, even though the body may not be cured. So, the mental, spiritual part can be perhaps more important even than the other, because one likes to be whole physically, but if that doesn't happen, one can be whole in the other ways.
What do you think, if you had to guess, what do you think Don Alberto's legacy will be?
Well, I would hope that people, might practice, his simple teachings a little bit to feel connected, and will find that their mood goes up. I mean, I think one of the problems right now is people are generally quite depressed because of all the things that are happening. So I think it can help that way if people, take it seriously and do something with it. So I hope that's what will happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think his teachings will have a shelf life? If I ask it that way, I suppose.
That's hard to say. I mean, I think there's a lot that can happen with them before maybe they become obsolete. But anyway, I don't think they'll ever be obsolete. It's always important, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, I think that we're at the beginning of the world turning over.
I hope
And
so. Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And being at the beginning, I think the teachings are important.
Yes. And for me, I was thinking that, what Americans are going through, I think is there's a lot of them are suffering for the first time, and maybe in Britain they are too. But having grown up in Britain during the Second World War, I think I have a certain maybe resilience that comes from that, because, for instance, we never knew whether a bomb might be dropped on our heads at any time. And in fact, there were people who lived a mile down the road who did have a bomb dropped on them. So it wasn't just a just a, I want to say, uh, um, an anxiety that wasn't real. So, I mean, we learn to live with it, is what I'm saying.
Right.
So I think to some extent, one has to learn to live with what's going on now.
Right. Right. Yeah. And we don't like to, we don't appreciate the hardship, going back to what you said earlier, we
Nobody
need to,
appreciates the hardship, but you get used to it, I think.
yeah. Yeah. Well, but I think it's important to identify the gratitude, you know, or try to develop the gratitude that the hardship can be a great teacher.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And if you never have any hardship, well, you don't develop, I think, either,
Right.
or often anyway.
Right. Yeah. There was a story in the book, I think with a snake, that you found a snake in your
Yeah.
house, and Don Alberto gives a story of the finding a thorn, and that the thorn is necessary for the snake to shed its skin.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. All right. And the snake is also a female of symbol wisdom, I mean, a symbol of, yes, a female wisdom, which I was very nice for him to tell me.
Hmm.
So, yes, in the part of the book that talks about the Andean context, that there are these understandings about the different directions and the different animals connected with them, and one of them is the snake. And there's also the shamanic perspective of the three levels. The level we live on. There's a lower level, which is not at all the same as our idea of hell, and there's the upper level, which does have the angelic beings. But the lower level one is interesting. I mean, he talked to me in terms of a natural cycle where you have the plants with the seeds in the ground, which is the lower level, and then they grow up into the air, which is our level, and then the seeds develop the flowers, and then that's the upper level, then it falls back again, the seeds onto the ground. So it goes around, or it goes in perhaps in a spiral, more than a circle. Um, so the lower level is in their view is sort of a recycling place. It's a place of where uh, life begins. It's where life ends and it also begins. And there's a very interesting gallery in a museum in Peru that I went to, that shows pre-contact statuettes, and a number of them show skeletons that are in sexual attitudes, and you think, what the heck is that about? And I think it's a visualization of this lower level. There's the death, and then there's the rebirth again coming out of it.
Hmm.
So they don't really have a sense of evil. They think rather in terms that this is negative stuff that can be, dispersed or recycled, or really recycling, I think, is the basic idea.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that their idea of evil is more like an imbalance?
Yes, I think so. And but maybe, yeah. Um, I mean, people can, I think, get, I don't know, that they can get caught up in negativity. So some of the healing is sort of the dispersal of negative energy. That's a good part of it.
Hmm.
And there are some yachaks who specialize in doing that, particularly in connection with the lower level there, the dregs. Yes, he had a story too of a man who um, was trying to draw him into conflict. He would meet him in the street, and this man, would try to kind of get him to react negatively. And Don Alberto instead would just smile at him. And eventually, this might not be a result one would really want, but the man committed suicide. He couldn't handle the fact that he couldn't draw Don Alberto into a conflict. And I guess he, got angry at himself instead. So But his message there was, to try and meet people who are negative with positivity. And I think that's perhaps too the message of Jesus's message of turning the other cheek.
You said that his wife is continuing his work a little bit. Did he have any children?
Yes. And yeah, he has actually with her 4 young children. I mean, she's the latest wife, and the oldest is 8, and the youngest is 1. So she's got a lot to do there.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I was wondering, it's too early to tell, I suppose. I was wondering if any of those would follow in their father's footsteps as a healer, since he seemed to be a generational healer as well.
Yeah. Well, she herself was a Yachak, and she said she, was intending to bring the children up that way. And apparently, one of the daughters, who is only, I think, 6, 5 or 6, has already said she wants to be a Yachak like her daddy.
Hmm.
So yeah, but you have to want to do it. In a way, one of the things that was interesting to me about his story is growing up. I mean, he grew up with this environment where they're all Yachak, so he just sort of absorbed it. But then he wasn't really sure. Ended up, particularly after his father's death, he wasn't sure that was really what he was meant to be doing, and he had some struggle before he completely accepted it. So.
Well, Shirley, I am so grateful for the time that you shared with me this morning. And I am very grateful for your sharing the teachings of Don Alberto as well.
Thank you.
And the book came out late last year. Is that correct?
No, it came out in February, in
Oh,
fact.
February this year.
This
Okay.
year.
All right.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's
Sorry
out.
about that.
Right.
I imagine it's available at most bookstores. I will put links in the show notes and video descriptions for the
Right.
book. My final question is, what do you have coming up in the future for you? What are you going to be working on next?
Well, at the moment, I'm working on, I'm trying to complete, what I've been doing for the last 40 years, in fact, which is working on the archaeology of the local area and to write a book about that. So that's what I'm engaged in right now. But I have a feeling I'm going to get more involved in Don Alberto's things, down the road, and it'll come happen somehow.
Well, I look
But I
forward to those.
have these 2 projects. This is the second one now I'm on.
Yeah. Well, you live in a very fascinating area. I would love to visit Concord at some point.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, some of my heroes are from there. So,
Yeah. Well, yes, it's sort of the center of the American Revolution and everything. But to me, one of my uh, thoughts about this, and what my orientation is, well, there were 10,000 years of another kind of history before the English ever arrived, and so that, I've spent a lot of time just trying to put together these collections that people have made actually over the last 100 years, picking things up in the fields.
mhm.
And one thing that they did well was to keep track of where they found them. There are all these notebooks who say where these artifacts came from. So that's very important. I mean, I've spent a lot of time putting it on the computer and so that it can be sorted out,
Mm.
and you can see the patterns there. So anyway, we'll see. There'll be a Concord
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
out at some point.
yeah. I always personally think it's really important to know the places where we live, and not just the plants and the animals and the insects, but also who the indigenous people were and how
That's,
they lived on the land.
yes,
It always seems to me that
yes.
that's so vital.
Well, yes, and I think growing up where I did, oriented me that way because, for instance, this was in Britain. There were earthworks around us, and nobody really quite knew what they were. And this intrigued me. You know, my parents were interested in history, so I had that orientation too. And I thought, who made these things? You know, what were they doing here? And then another thing was that the church down the road had a brass with a Norman French inscription on it. And I said to my mother, what were the French doing here? You know, so I I had this idea, you know, that you live in a place and there are a lot of other strange people who were here as well, and wouldn't it be interesting to know about them?
Mm.
So I grew up with that viewpoint. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then another aspect of it was that my grandmother, whom I knew well, and I remember this from being about 5 years old, and she had a lady to tea who was an acquaintance rather than a friend. And my grandmother said, I don't know why it is that where the British people go all over the world, they always think they're better than everybody else. Right? And so then the lady, whom she didn't really know that well, drew herself up and she said, well, aren't we? So I remember that from being 5 years old.
Right. Yeah. And I think Americans inherited that, you know,
Yeah, I
that
think so too.
attitude quite a bit. And we're not. So, well, Shirley, thank you again. I'm so grateful for this time. It was a delight speaking with you. And I really encourage everyone to get a copy of the book, The Way of Abundance and Joy, the Shamanic Teachings of Don Alberto Taxo. There's so much wisdom to share in there.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you.
And that's a wrap on episode 35 of Rebel Spirit Radio. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you are part of my YouTube audience. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to give it a positive rating on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. It only takes a second, and your 5-star ratings really do help. If you have a minute to spare, please consider posting a short but positive review. And please consider subscribing. For those viewing on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you will be informed when I upload new content. With a few exceptions, I've been releasing episodes weekly and would like to continue doing so. I'm also working on creating additional video content for the YouTube channel, including book reviews, educational videos on topics concerning spirituality and the history of religion and the religious response to the climate crisis. But that extra content takes a lot of time and work. If you would like to support me in creating free and credible material on YouTube and continuing with this podcast, please consider making a one-time donation via PayPal. You can find a link for that in the video description or show notes. Your support makes this podcast possible. I'm Nick Mather, and you've been listening to Rebel Spirit Radio. Until next time, may you be in peace, may you flourish in all possible ways, and may you continue to nurture your rebel spirit.